Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I always enjoy working with MCASB so much, so I'm really excited to be here and help out with the winter stamp workshop. Um, I personally love making stamps, and I think that it's a great way to make different pieces of art, to make really great homemade cards, and even you can make gift wrap. So I Yeah, so today we'll be exploring different stamps that we will be making out of different household items, which I find really fun because, if anything has a malleable texture in order to carve, or if anything has just a really cool texture, it can make for a really amazing stamp. So before we kind of get into it, if there are any participants that are under the age of 12, we just recommend that there be a parent either supervising or assisting, because there are some stamps that I'll be going over that include using sharp tools such as knives or carving tools. So we just want to make sure that everyone is safe and that everything is good to go. But yeah, without further ado, let's start the workshop. Um, so I'm going to be showing a few different stamps that we're going to make, and I'll be showing how to make those stamps. And then at the end, I'll show how to go about printing them. So yeah, so first, one of my personal favorites that is actually really fun to do is making a stamp using dried pasta. So first, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take a piece of cardboard, can be any shape that you want, and then what you'll want to do, you want to take some pasta. I personally really like using spaghetti, but you can pretty much use anything if you would like, just depending on what sort of look that you're going for. I personally really like using spaghetti because you can break it easily into different pieces and make different patterns and shapes and designs. So basically what you will do is you'll take your pasta and you'll break it into whatever size pieces that you need for your stamp. And you're going to take those and you're going to want to arrange them however you would like on your piece of cardboard. It's obviously easiest to do that when it's lying flat. So once you have those kind of all arranged as you like it, you'll want to take some trusty white glue and just glue down all of the pieces of pasta. You definitely you can be generous while putting down the glue, because the most important thing is that the pasta will stick to the cardboard, and after it dries, it'll be good to go. So I made one earlier today where I kind of glued it into a pine tree shape. As you can see, the glue is still drying. Sometimes if I know that I'll be using these, I will make them the night before, just so I'm not waiting on having the glue dry. But it's really nice and it's really fun. And there are all sorts of possibilities as you kind of arrange them. I have two previous ones that I made that are really fun. This one took a little bit more time, but I've previously made a snowflake that I used for printing. And so it's great. It's held up really, really nicely because I used a lot of glue. I also have a different sort of pine tree. So these are great for winter. It's kind of up to you how you would like what sort of shapes that you would like to make. The possibilities are endless. So I think that it's a really kind of fun and innovative way how to make stamps. Yes, Alex.
So basically you just took cardboard cutouts and you cut them out the size that you wanted your stamp to be.
Correct. You'll want to make sure that however big you want your stamp, the cardboard will be correlating. But also if the cardboard happens to be a little bit bigger, that's fine too. You just want to make sure that it will fit whatever design that you have.
And why did you pick cardboard for that rather than like a piece of paper or?
Yeah, so cardboard is a little bit more sturdy, and when you do make a stamp, you want to have it uh, be a little bit more tangible and everything like that. You want to make sure that it's not going to be flimsy. If you had a piece of paper with pasta on it, it might not turn out right because it's so flexible, but with how firm the cardboard is, it makes it really nice and simple and easy to make designs and to make prints with them. So I'm going to be using cardboard for a few of these. Cardboard comes in handy because it gives you a nice steady surface for your stamps. So yeah, the great question. So yeah, pasta stamps are really fun. Obviously, you can figure out how different shapes of pasta, how that would look. Obviously, you want to kind of keep in mind that every sort of raised edge on the stamps will be what is on the paper. So that's why I personally like spaghetti, because it is what you get. It's not like rigatoni or anything like that where you don't know how it's going to turn out. So next I'm going to move on to another type of stamp that I personally like to make. It's one that's used using string. I personally use cardboard and some kitchen twine. This works fine, some kitchen string. Any type of string will basically work. You just want to make sure that it'll be thick enough for your design to show. You don't want anything like thread or something that's really fine, because you're not going to get all that texture that you really want. So basically what I do is, you can, again, make any sort of design that you would like. I personally find it really fun to wrap around my cardboard with the string. So what I first like to do is I like to take a piece of Scotch tape, or any sort of tape will work, and I will tape the string to the back of my piece of cardboard. And this will make sure that it's secure and that the string will hold taut the entire time as you make your stamp. So then I like to take it and then wrap it around, and you can kind of do any sort of design. You can make zigzags with it. The possibilities are really great for this one. And it also gives a really nice pattern. It's a good way to kind of make more abstract stamps. So once you have it wrapped around, you'll take your scissor and cut your string. And then on the back of it, you'll want to, again, secure the piece of string with another piece of tape. And then you have your finished stamp. And you can, again, make patterns. You can overlap the string. One of my favorites that I use a lot is this stamp that I made. It's a kind of crosshatch pattern, and it comes out really nicely when used. So yeah, you can wrap it around in any sort of direction that you would like, and it makes for a great stamp. And you always, the one tip that I would recommend is that when you do dip it in paint or paint it to make your pressing, to make sure that there is a lot of paint on it, because the string will absorb a little bit of it, but after you use it for a while, you don't necessarily see that problem anymore. So then I'm going to move on to another stamp that is in the similar sort of family. Sorry. So as I was saying earlier, texture is so important when making these homemade stamps. And so I personally, another one that I like to use is, I like to use bubble wrap. I like to cut it out into different shapes. Also, bubble wrap is great if you're trying to find a fun texture for maybe the background of whatever work that you're making, or card or anything like that. So you even just use it as, cut out a square of bubble wrap and then just use that on its own, or you can make a shape and you can glue it to a piece of cardboard. Again, the cardboard makes sure it's really nice and firm, and so it's not going to affect your printing, but you will want to make sure, because the bubble wrap is a little bit closer to the cardboard, it's not as raised, that you make sure that you, wherever you put paint will show. So you'll wanna make sure to get it in the lines. But bubble wrap is another great way, and it makes a really, really nice texture on your stamps. So then another form of stamp that I really like to use is an everyday household object that we all have, sponges. Sponges give a great texture, and you can cut them into any sort of shape that you'd like. Right here I have a really nice star drawn out. So it's very simple. You can, you basically just cut around whatever design that you have. And you'll wanna make sure that you have sharp scissors for this, because sponges are a little bit tough. And so you'll continue to cut out your design. And sponges are great because you can use them over and over again. It's not like a one-time thing where you have to then discard it. You can wash it out, use it again, and it's a great, fun way to give your stamp a nice texture, and also really easy to make a whole variety of shapes. So as you can see, I easily just made a really cute star, very easy to make. I also have a previous pine tree that I made, which is really great. And so these are great stamps to use when making homemade stamps. They're very kid-friendly as well, so they're something that you can use over and over again. I personally love the texture that they give as well, and depending on how much paint that you use, can really give a different texture on top of that. So then, speaking of sponges, something that I like to use, it's not necessarily a stamp as much as these other ones, is I really like using steel wool when making prints. Steel wool is great. It's easier to paint it than to dip it into paint, but it'll get a really nice kind of speckled background. As you can see, I used it on this print that I made using my snowflake stencil, and it's in the background, and it gives it a really nice texture. It gives it a little bit of depth, and so I really like using steel wool. Like I said, it's not necessarily as much of a stamp as everything else, but it's in the sponge family. I thought I'd throw it out there to give a little bit more of a variety. So I know that also, I just want to say, I know that we're going a little bit fast, but this is just, there's a lot of stamps that I just want to share with all of you. And so if you have any questions, please don't feel free to ask questions or anything like that. So next, one of my personal favorites, which is really, really fun and a lot easier than a lot of other materials that you could use for this, is using potatoes. Potatoes are great. They're starchy. They're really easy to carve, so it's very family friendly. Like I said, if you're going to be making these stamps and you're under the age of 12, we really recommend having some adult supervision just to make sure that everything is a-okay. As you can see, I have one that I previously carved this morning of a cute little heart. It's really, really nice, very easy to do. But I'm going to show you all how to do that right now with a potato. So I previously carved a design. I don't know if you all can see, it's a star. So when you want to take I have a carving tool, but also an X-Acto knife or a paring knife will work. You'll want to take that and make whatever design that you would like. And you'll want to make sure that your cuts are very deep into the potato, just because it'll make your life a little bit easier. And so once you go over the design that you've carved with your knife, and also if you need to draw it out, it's kind of a little bit difficult, but if you need to use a marker, sometimes that'll work. Sometimes it doesn't though, because of the moisture of the potato. But also it's a great way how to freehand stuff. And so it's kind of, it's fun that way. So once the potato is nice and carved and you have very deep lines in the potato. What I found works best is you'll want to take your carving tool and about a half an inch or quarter inch to half inch, however deep you want it, you'll want to kind of go along the edge of your potato with it. And this gives it a nice start, so it'll make carving out the excess space a little bit easier. So you'll just want to do that all the way around the potato. And like I said, make sure to be very careful when doing this. If you can, in spots that are tough, make sure to point the knife away from you just in case. But so after you've done that and it's kind of loosened up a little bit, you'll want to take your knife, and I like to do it in increments because it's a little bit easier to carve away everything. And so then I like to take my tool, go down to about where you cut the line on the potato previously, and carve out little chunks. And so after you kind of make little increments, you can kind of take your tool and go along and do that a couple times, and then all the pieces will kind of pop out, which is really great. So you'll want to do that, and like I said, little increments, make it really easy. It makes it a little bit less daunting than fully carving something out, but it's kind of slow and steady wins the race, and you want to kind of put it underneath the piece of potato as well. It kind of pops off. So you'll do that all the way around the potato until your design is fully carved. But as you can see, it does give really nice depth. It's, even though it is oxidizing a little bit, it's still very firm. You can use these many times before you have, like, you can use for a day. You can use the stamps many times. It's not really going to like wilt on you necessarily. The starch in the potato holds up really nicely. So once you do that, you'll have something obviously that looks like this, where it's nice and carved out. Like I said, even though it's oxidizing and not so pretty up here, this is still really nice and firm, and I would be able to make a lot of really great stamps out of this. Yes.
So if you're going to keep like a vegetable stamp or a potato stamp and use it multiple days, I mean, do you feel like it keeps, maybe you could wrap it in cling film and put it in the fridge?
Yeah. Something else that also helps oxidation. I mean, personally, I would use I try to do everything all in one day. And then if I needed to make another stamp the next day, I would do that. But also cling wrap will help. We're putting it in a Tupperware container, but also something like lemon juice does help the stop of oxidation. So if you maybe brush a little bit of lemon juice on it, that would help it as well. So, I mean, if I was making a potato stamp, I would try to, it would last fine throughout the entire day. But overnight, it might be a little bit more questionable. And also in the fridge would help. So, yeah. So, so that's the potato stamp. If you try it out, you'll see that it works really, really nicely. It's not hard to carve at all. And it does make for a really great stamp. Now I'm kind of gonna, before I switch over to other forms of produce, a very similar method as I just showed you with the potato. If you want something a little bit more sustainable, granted, it's not as, you don't have much surface area to work with, but you can also use the same method that I just showed you and carve out a cork to make a stamp. So you just draw your design on the cork, as I did with Sharpie, and then you take your carving tool and you carve along the lines. And it's very tough, so I would definitely have a adult help you if you're a child doing this. And then again, kind of go around the edge of the cork, and the piece will kind of pop off like that. So as you can see, a cork, it's the same technique that I showed you with the potato, but it will obviously have a very long shelf life. The only negative side is there's very little surface area to work with. So if you are wanting to make small stamps like this, it's great. But if you want something a little bit bigger, potatoes are probably the better way to go for carved stamps. But these are all great options out of things that you can find in your house. And next, I'm kind of going to move over to using different produce. So produce is really great because it has a lot of them have really cool textures. Naturally, they have really amazing designs, and they're very accessible. One of my personal favorites is I love taking an apple and cutting it in half, and apples naturally have this really pretty star in the center of them. You can either, I've used stamps before where I use the entire apple, and that, you know, that's a lot of surface area for your paint, but it does still show the apple nicely. You'll just want to make sure to cut directly through the core, so you get this nice design. But I personally also like cutting around it into shapes so that I have this pretty little like flower star shape that makes a really great stamp. Not only do you have the, and I just cut this with a paring knife on a cutting board as you would normally cut an apple. And so you kind of just cut the design that you'd like, or, you know, if you want a little block print with a star in it, this is also a really great option. And I just like them because you can make, you know, whatever shape you want, and it has this really pretty star pattern in the middle of it. Another great option is using citrus fruits. I personally like using lemons and limes. Sometimes though, it does help if to get the texture and have it not be a little as watery, is sometimes I will cut them the night before and let them dry out a little bit, as I did for these. And so that way it just kind of enunciates the pattern in the fruit. And so it gives a really nice pattern as well. And so these you can just paint or dip in paint, and they make really great stamps. Also, basically what I find really great is that any sort of fruit or vegetable that has a cool pattern you can use. So I've also, for instance, use Brussels sprouts. I've just cut them in half and make different patterns with them. You know, depending on what you want, you just want to make sure that it's a little bit more, it'll hold up against the paint. You don't want something that is like too flimsy, like a mango or something like that. Like that's not going to be a good stamp. And you also want to think about what has really nice texture. So one of my other favorites of using vegetables is if you cut the bottom of a stalk of celery, it makes this really pretty flower pattern. So then you can paint all this, and it makes a really pretty stamp. So all these are very simple. Like I said, for the produce, all you got to do is basically cut it in half, but it makes a really amazing result. So I'll even show you right now with this piece of celery. So what you want to do is, I personally, I use acrylic paint just because it's really accessible. I have a bunch of it at my house. So I have my paint. And what you want to do is you'll just want to paint the surface of the celery. And I like to use I like to use a brush for this one, just because all the different pieces are a little bit more far apart than the others. But basically, you'll do that, make it sure that it's all covered. And then you'll take it. I have this really nice card that I'll give to someone. Stamp it down. I got to do a couple more of these, and you can kind of turn it and make it even a better flower. I think I got to use a little bit more paint on some of these ones though. But it makes a great little flower design. So yeah, sometimes and as you can see, some of these didn't press as much, and so then you might want to trim your celery a little bit. That always helps, making sure it's level. But this is a great option for doing produce as your stamps. So yeah, that's kind of all the stamps that I was going to show today. But as you can see, there is a really nice wide variety, and basically all you then have to do is paint them, press them into your piece of paper, and then it's good to go. Yes, Alex?
Do you have okay, so for the celery you used a brush.
Yes.
I guess different stamps have a better different application methods. Like maybe for the sponge, you want to dip it because it absorbs more. So
Exactly.
how do you, like, maybe you can tell us more about preparing the paint and different methods.
So I'll just walk through each stamp that I've gone over and kind of tell you which method is probably best for your stamp making. So first we will go back to the pasta stamp. And so for these, as you can see, I first use a brush for this just to make sure that all the sides of the pasta are really nicely coated. And with this, you can be really generous with the amount of paint that you use, because the paint that is on the cardboard will not show. But you'll really want to put a lot of paint on the brush and make sure that every single side of the pasta is covered. And so that is going to yield the best results for the pasta stamps. And so, yeah, if you just make sure that it gets all coated. So for these, I like to go over them a couple of times, but as you can see, I just didn't press it hard enough, but here is an example of one that I did earlier of the pasta, and then next to it is the sponge, two different little pine trees. So you just got to make sure that there's enough paint on them. And I probably should have put a little bit more. That's why it didn't fully come out on the one that I just made. But they do make really nice stamps. Like you said, for the for the string, I personally like also using a paintbrush just to make sure that you do get on the little sides of every single crevice of the pieces of string. You want to make sure that those are fully covered and just to kind of get in there. The sponges are best if you put a little bit of paint on a plate and dip it in. That's going to really soak up really nicely in the sponges. So that's always great. For the citrus, you can do either or. For the citrus, I'll show an example. With more paint versus less paint, it does yield a different result. So I have this one that I made where obviously the ones at the top had more paint, and then the ones at the bottom had less paint, and they all have really great, still great designs. It just kind of depends on what you want. So if you want a lot of paint, you can dip those. If you want to really control the amount of paint that's on the citrus, then I would suggest using a brush. And then for the potatoes, and for the apples, those are also either or. For the apple, I like using the brush though, because I can get the paint in the star shape, and then it makes it does help along with making that star shape in it. And then the Brussels sprouts, I will dip. I won't dip them very heavily. It'll be a lighter dip, but those work really well. And then, like I said, the celery can be good for either, but I personally like painting it.
It looks like we have some amazing examples. Santa's holding up. Let's see. Oh, that looks amazing.
Oh,
beautiful.
Part of what I love about this is that making the stamp is a project on its own, and then printing is a whole other project on its own. You know, I made a heart stamp earlier, and out of a potato, and not only can you make stamps or hearts, but I also made it into like a flower shape. Here is an example of the inside of the apple in a square shape of a stamp, which I really enjoyed making. What else? Here is an example of the string that I did, which I really like. You can either give a card like this, or you could print something else on top of it as well. And then, like I showed earlier, here is a great example of the snowflake stencil, or the snowflake stamp that I made. Also, in addition to making cards, especially for the holidays, it is also really simple to kind of go a little bit more sustainable route for your gifts this year. And you can take a regular, paper bag from the grocery store, and if you just cut it so it's open flat, you can then take all your stamps and stamp whatever sort of design on it, and then use this as gift wrap this year. So
I think we had a question from Briar Floyd.
I was just wondering, have you tried any of these with like an ink pad, or is paint best, do you think?
I mean, you could definitely use an ink pad. I personally just don't have one, so I was kind of using what I have and what I kind of use when I do them. But an ink pad would definitely work, I would say, for the potatoes. It might work well for the apples, the Brussels sprouts, and stuff like that. But it's, as long as you get ink or paint on the stamp that you made, I'm sure that it would work pretty easier. The only one that I'd be a little bit skeptical of doing that is, I don't know if it'd necessarily take to the sponge as well, just because you really want the sponge to soak up a lot of paint.
Great.
All
Do we have
right.
any other questions? Or yes, Sylvia, let's see, I'll unmute you. Oh,
Okay, I think I got it. Okay. Yeah, what do you use, what do you recommend for cardstock if you want to make some greeting cards or whatever?
Yeah, so if you want to make greeting cards, cardstock is always a great option. It's depending on what stamp that you're using and how much paint that you're using. Cardstock is always a great option, or craft paper will work as well. I wouldn't necessarily use something like computer paper. That's a little bit too thin for the paint, but also, you can make it work. If the only, I think, downside to using something like computer paper is that it might bleed through, but if you just kind of maybe separated it, didn't have it folded while you printed, it could still very much work.
And if kids were doing it, construction paper, anything that's thicker, right?
Yeah, you want it to be a little bit thicker just so it absorbs the paint and everything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess maybe the paper will warp a little bit from the moisture, and especially like if it's a potato stamp. So do you maybe put, once the piece has dried, obviously, I guess you could stack some books on it to like even it out, or flatten it out a bit?
Or like, for instance, if you had, let me see. If you had something that was a design that was kind of like more in the middle of things, say that this piece of paper was bigger, while it's drying, you could definitely weigh it down as well, because this was originally a bigger piece of paper and I cut it down. And so that also helps too. But afterwards is great, after the piece is dried. And for greeting cards, if you fold them beforehand, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. This one I had folded beforehand. It didn't really warp too much. So yeah. Yeah. So yeah, any other questions? All right, well, I'm glad that I could kind of show you guys how to make stamps. I know that it was a lot of information, but I just wanted to give as many options as possible. I love that all these materials are really accessible to everyone, and there's a lot of different ways to make stamps just depending on what's in your cupboard.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you everybody for joining us. If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, please do so you can find out about any upcoming events we have, and you can do that on the homepage of our website, which is mcasantabarbara.org. And we're just so glad that you joined us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely weekend.
Bye.